Nobody has ever been sad while eating ice cream, and if you have, the ice cream wasn't good enough. Ice cream is fat, water, air, and sugar held together by cold. The sugar lowers the freezing point so it stays scoopable instead of turning to a block. The air gets whipped in during churning, and that's where everything is decided. Cheap ice cream runs 50% air, it melts fast and leaves nothing behind. Premium ice cream runs 20% denser, richer, one scoop that actually satisfies. Every time you felt one brand was richer without knowing why, you were tasting the difference air makes. Less air, more to say. Ice cream didn't start in America. Persia was pouring rosewater over mountain snow in 400 BC. A Tang dynasty emperor owned 94 ice-making machines. Arab traders built Sorbet, which became Sorbet. It crossed into Europe through Sicily, sat in Parisian cafes, stayed expensive and rare for centuries. Then, in 1843, an American woman named Nancy Johnson patented the hand-cranked ice cream freezer, and overnight, a luxury of kings became something you eat on a Tuesday because it's Tuesday and you want it. Gelato is the version that Italians will insist is not the same as ice cream, and they are right, but not always for the reasons they give. The most commonly cited difference is that gelato contains less fat than ice cream it is made with more milk and less cream. Sometimes with no cream at all, which is true and matters. But the more important difference is the overrun. Gelato is churned much more slowly than ice cream and at a lower speed, which incorporates far less air into the mixture. The result is a denser, silkier, more intensely flavored product that sits heavier on the spoon and carries its flavors with a concentration that standard ice cream rarely matches. Gelato is also served at a slightly warmer temperature than ice cream, around 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, which keeps it soft and pliable enough to be worked with a paddle and served in those swooping. Sculpted portions you see in Italian gelaterias. That warmer temperature is not laziness. It is a deliberate choice that keeps the texture in the range where it coats the mouth most effectively, which is where flavor perception is highest. The best gelato I ever ate was pistachio, in a small gelateria in Catania, Sicily, made from pistachios grown on the slopes of Mount Etna. The color was a deep, natural green, not the bright artificial green that most pistachio ice cream uses to signal its flavor. It tasted so intensely of pistachio that eating it felt almost confrontational. That is what gelato is supposed to do, and when it does it, there is nothing else in the frozen dessert world that competes. Sorbet is the frozen dessert that carries the most honesty of any in this category, because it has nothing to hide behind. No fat, no dairy, no egg, just fruit, sugar, and water churned until frozen, stripped of everything that could soften or complicate what it's trying to say. A great sorbet tastes more intensely of its fruit than the fruit itself, because the sugar draws out and concentrates the aromatic compounds that carry flavor, and the cold temperature slightly paradoxically can suppress some of the sweetness while leaving the fruit character more prominent. Mango sorbet made from ripe Alfonso mangoes at peak season tastes like an argument that nothing else needs to exist. Raspberry sorbet with the right balance of acid has a brightness that cuts through whatever came before it on the table and resets your palate completely. The texture of sorbet is the hardest thing to get right. Too little sugar, and it freezes into an icy, coarse slab. Too much, and it stays almost liquid and never properly sets. The ratio is a tightrope, and the best sorbet makers walk it perfectly every time. Sorbet is also the one frozen dessert that every culture arrived at independently, because putting sweetened fruit juice in the cold and eating it is an instinct that requires no tradition and no equipment beyond access to cold. It is the most ancient impulse in this entire conversation. Soft serve is the version that people underestimate consistently, and I want to defend it here before we go any further. Soft serve is dispensed from a machine at a warmer temperature than scooped ice cream, which gives it that smooth, creamy texture that is specifically its own and cannot be replicated by simply warming a scoop of hard ice cream. The overrun in soft serve is higher than in premium ice cream. More air is incorporated, but at the temperature it's served, that air creates a lightness that is genuinely pleasurable rather than cheap feeling. The McDonald's vanilla soft serve cone is one of the most engineered food products ever produced, and I mean that as a compliment. It is formulated to a precise flavor profile, dispensed at a specific temperature, swirled to a specific height, and designed to begin melting in a way that creates a specific drip pattern at a specific rate. Billions of people have experienced it and had the same sensory memory attached to it. That kind of consistent, universally accessible pleasure is not nothing. It is not gelato. It is also not trying to be. Mochi ice cream is where Japanese precision meets the universal pleasure of frozen dairy, and the result is one of the more ingenious frozen desserts produced anywhere in the modern food world. Mochi is a chewy rice cake made from glutinous rice pounded into a smooth, elastic dough, and wrapping it around a ball of ice cream sounds straightforward until you consider the engineering challenge involved. The mochi dough must be pliable enough to stretch around the frozen filling without tearing, but firm enough to hold its shape when cold. The ice cream inside must be frozen solid enough to survive the wrapping process without melting, but soft enough to eat pleasurably once it reaches the customer. The solution involves flash freezing at multiple stages, specific ratios of sugar in the mochi dough that prevent it from freezing rock hard alongside the filling, and a size small enough that the whole thing can be eaten in 2 bites before the temperature differential between the warm-ish exterior and the frozen interior causes structural failure. That last part is the key to understanding why mochi ice cream is exactly the size it is. The size is not arbitrary. The size is the answer to a physics problem. The Japanese ice cream company Lotte introduced a version commercially in the 1980s, and by the 2000s, it had spread across North America and Europe to the point where it now appears in the frozen aisle of mainstream grocery stores, which is a remarkable journey for a product whose entire premise depends on solving a temperature engineering challenge that most frozen dessert makers never attempted. Kulfi is the ice cream that predates the ice cream machine by centuries and has never needed one. Originating in the Indian subcontinent during the Mughal Empire in the 16th century, kulfi is made by reducing whole milk over a low flame for hours, sometimes up to an hour and a half, until the water content evaporates significantly and what remains is a dense, concentrated, sweetened milk solid enriched with cream, sugar, and flavorings such as cardamom, saffron, rosewater, or pistachio. This mixture is then poured into sealed conical molds, traditionally made from tin and frozen, without any churning at all. The result is a dense, almost chewy frozen dessert that is nothing like the light, airy texture of Western ice cream. Kulfi does not melt the same way it sweats rather than liquefies, releasing its flavor slowly as it warms, holding its shape much longer than a scoop of regular ice cream would in the same heat. In the Indian summer, where temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, this slow melt is not just a texture preference, it is a practical adaptation that makes kulfi survivable as street food, in conditions that would turn a soft serve cone into a puddle within minutes. Kulfi, served with faluda, which is thin rice vermicelli noodles in rose-flavored milk, is one of the iconic street food combinations of the subcontinent, a dessert that is layered and complex and completely unlike anything the Western ice cream tradition has produced, and it is older than most of that tradition by several centuries. Semifreddo is Italy's other great frozen dessert contribution, and it lives in the space between ice cream and mousse in a way that no other frozen dessert quite occupies. The name means half cold, which is an accurate physical description and also a poetic one. Semifreddo is made by folding together whipped cream, whipped egg whites, and a sugar syrup into an airy mixture that is then frozen without churning. Because the air is already incorporated before freezing rather than during, and because the mixture contains a high proportion of fat and protein from the cream and eggs, Semifreddo freezes to a texture that is lighter than ice cream, softer than sorbet, and more stable than mousse. It slices cleanly. It holds its shape on a plate. It can be made with any flavor that can be folded into a mousse dark chocolate, amaretto, lemon, praline, and it requires no special equipment beyond a mixer and a loaf pan. The Semifreddo is arguably the most elegant frozen dessert that a home cook can produce without professional equipment, which makes it one of the great underused recipes in the domestic kitchen. The fact that most people have never made one is a gap I genuinely want to fix, because a Semifreddo brought to a dinner party produces the kind of silence that means everyone is busy eating instead of talking, which is the correct response to food that is doing its job properly. Frozen yogurt arrived in the 1970s as a health-conscious alternative to ice cream and has spent the 50 years since then pretending to be something it isn't, which is my genuine frustration with it as a category. Frozen yogurt contains live bacterial cultures, lactobacillus, and other probiotics that are present in regular yogurt and that provide documented digestive benefits. The problem is that most commercial frozen yogurt is so heavily sweetened, so processed, and served in portions so large that any health advantage over ice cream is thoroughly neutralized by the sugar and calorie content. The 2000s froyo boomed the self-serve shops with 15 flavors and 30 toppings where you paid by weight and routinely walked out with something that weighed half a pound and cost $8 was not a health food movement. It was a dessert industry rebranded with a suffix that made people feel better about eating it. Real frozen yogurt, made with genuine live culture yogurt, minimal sweetener, and served in a reasonable portion, is actually a different and interesting product with a tangy, slightly sour flavor that ice cream cannot replicate. That version exists and is worth finding. What most frozen yogurt shops were selling was not that version. And I think the honesty gap between what froyo claimed to be and what it was is one of the more successful acts of culinary misdirection of the last half century. Ice cream sandwiches, ice cream bars, novelty ice cream on a stick, these are not lesser forms of ice cream. They are ice cream that has solved the problem of portability. And in solving that problem, they created a category of experience that cannot be replicated in a bowl. The specific pleasure of biting through a chocolate shell into cold vanilla ice cream, the snap, the contrast of temperatures, the chocolate and cream arriving simultaneously is a textural sequence that eating ice cream from a bowl never produces. The chocolate coating technology behind a Magnum bar, where a specially formulated chocolate is tempered to snap cleanly without shattering the ice cream beneath it, is genuine food engineering applied in service of a very specific sensory moment. The ice cream sandwich, where the cookies or wafers soften slightly from contact with the ice cream and the whole thing compresses under the pressure of a bite into a unified texture, is a different experience from any other form the same ice cream could take. Novelty format is not compromise. Novelty format is a specific promise about a specific way of eating. And when the product keeps that promise, it deserves the same respect we give to the most carefully crafted gelateria scoop. What all of these frozen desserts share gelato and sorbet and kulfi and mochi and semifreddo and the soft serve cone and the chocolate shelled bar is the same original impulse that someone in 400 BC Persia acted on, when they poured rosewater over snow and decided that cold and sweet together was worth pursuing. Every culture that encountered that combination found a way to make it their own. Every generation since has added a technique, a flavor, a format that the generation before hadn't thought of. The ice cream in your freezer right now is the current answer to a question humanity has been asking for at least 2,500 years. It is not the final answer. Somewhere right now, someone is working on the next one, and when they figure it out, it will probably taste extraordinary. Stay hungry.